With these remarks, I will give the floor to Mr. Danilo Turk of Slovenia to present his visionary statement, which we already received in a written form. Mr. Turk.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished ambassadors, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege and a great honor to be with you this morning, because I am fully aware of the fact that the informal dialogues are one of the important innovations in the practices of the United Nations. And I say so because my life has been for a very long time very closely associated with the United Nations. And today I am appearing before you as a person who has witnessed and participated in a number of activities of the United Nations, in many efforts, some of which did not succeed, but some of which did. I started 30 years ago and more as an expert on human rights, working on very important and interesting subjects such as freedom of expression and reduction of censorship, building a system of indicators to measure the progress in the field of implementation of economic, social and cultural rights, developing a text, a draft declaration on the right to development, which has later become a standard feature of UN development and human rights discourse and policy making. And all this experience in human rights has remained with me throughout my professional life. Later I became representative of the Republic of Slovenia to the United Nations and spent most of the 1990s in New York as permanent representatives. I must say this room is nicely renovated. I've been here many times, participated in many discussions. I remember full well the lessons and messages of Agenda for Peace, a great program which was produced at a particularly happy moment of the United Nations, but remains still unfulfilled in many respects. And I'm fully committed to those ideas that were discussed 20 and more years ago in this room. I was also a member of the Security Council in late 1990s, witnessing some of the difficulties characterizing the work of the Council and trying to help in overcoming them. I participated in the mission of the Security Council to East Timor in 1999, and I firmly believe that missions like this are a very important tool of preventive diplomacy where Security Council has an indispensable role. I'm very happy to see that these days such missions continue. I have read the reports about the mission to Africa, in particular the preventive spirit in which the discussions in Dakar were held, and in other places as well, with an aim to reduce tensions and prevent conflicts in several parts in Africa where the tensions are high. Later, Secretary General Kofi Annan invited me to serve as his assistant for political affairs. And I worked with Kofi Annan for 5 years on a number of crisis situations, with a number of regional organizations, dealing with issues of security and peace, but also preventive diplomacy, strengthening of democracy, and, yes, UN reforms. Human rights, by historic coincidence, came back to the center of agenda in 2005, where one of the most important reforms was contemplated, namely creation of the Human Rights Council, an idea that has been with us in the United Nations for a very long time before. But the historic moment for its implementation came in 2005, and I'm proud to say that I was among those who advised the Secretary General on exactly how to define the profile of the Human Rights Council and how to make sure that all member states are reviewed, universal periodic review, and that the reviewers are reviewed first. Now, these were the kind of ideas which were long in the making, and the moment of their implementation came rather quickly. I'm happy to see that practice follow-up to that important decision is generally good, but there are still many things to improve. I draw two lessons from this experience. Lesson number one, commitment to the United Nations. We who work in the United Nations are very often frustrated with the slow pace of change. We are sometimes impatient when we see that problems remain elusive and solutions long in coming. But then if we take a proper temporal perspective and we judge the performance of the United Nations in a proper temporal perspective, we would clearly see that many important historic developments have taken place as a result or with the assistance of the United Nations. Now that has strengthened my commitment to the organization and has been an important element in my decision to present my candidature to you. Commitment. Commitment based on specific experience. In the vision statement, I laid out my basic ideas about the United Nations for the future, and I do not wish to repeat them in detail. I would, however, mention a few elements which I believe are of special importance. First, the type of partnerships the UN has to develop in the present and in the coming period. First, and very important, partnership among member states, their commitment to multilateralism, strengthening of sovereignty as responsibility, which is not only responsibility to citizens of a state, but also to the international community and to the progress of humankind. Obviously, UN works in a situation where regional organizations have gained a great deal of new importance, have developed their policies and sophistication to new levels, important partners without whom UN cannot succeed. And finally, among partnerships, horizontal communication and cooperation with civil society, business community, academia, and the media. All these are partnerships that UN has to cultivate and where the Secretary General has to play a role. And this applies to all three main areas of work of the United Nations: maintenance of peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. In the area of maintenance of peace and security, I have noticed, reading recent reports, that more and more emphasis is placed on preventive activities. This also was very clearly expressed in the reports relating to peace operations. And it is important to realize that in preventive work, all bodies of the United Nations have a role. Obviously, here is the Secretary General with his important role under Article 99, and I'm sure that we are going to discuss that in the course of this morning. But there is also a very important role of the Security Council, to which I have already alluded, and I would add the General Assembly. I would like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, today to think about the powers of the General Assembly, in particular Article 14, which empowers the General Assembly to adjust any situation that it deems likely to impair general welfare or friendly relations among nations. A very important platform for activity which has not been sufficiently used in the past. It has been used occasionally, but much more is needed. And when I'm mentioning this example, I'm doing so only to remind ourselves that prevention is a task for us all. When it comes to sustainable development, I understand that sustainable development belongs to the center of activity of the United Nations at present. And obviously, there are many specific tasks which are involved here. One of which I would like to especially emphasize, and that is to ensure that the policy level, the level of political commitment and the level of policy seriousness does not diminish over time. We have seen following the Rio conference that the Commission on Sustainable Development gradually lost its initial influence, and we should not allow anything similar to happen now. And finally, on human rights, I think we need to strengthen the capacity of our institutions. Human rights were not developed in a very detailed way in the Charter of the United Nations itself. It came as a result of Universal Declaration and subsequent instruments. And now we have the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we have the Council for Human Rights, and we have other forums. We have to mainstream human rights and ensure that they are taken as a part of the UN overall program. These, ladies and gentlemen, are my initial thoughts. I did not wish and I do not have the time to go into further detail, but I will gladly do so in the course of this morning, and I would like to inform you just right from the beginning. I came to New York yesterday to stay for about 10 days. I wouldn't want to miss the events towards the end of next week, and I would be very happy to meet with you individually or in smaller groups to discuss any of the questions you find interesting in some more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Danilo Turk.